The Diane Downs Case, A Mother's Betrayal. Hey everyone, welcome back to our channel. Today, we're delving into a case that's as tragic as it is horrifying. This is the story of Diane Downs, a mother who committed an unimaginable act of betrayal. We're going to explore this case in depth, examining the psychological and emotional manipulation that led to this horrific crime. Buckle up, because this one is going to be intense. It's a quiet night in Springfield, Oregon on May 19th, 1983. Diane Downs, a seemingly loving mother, rushes into the emergency room, her shirt soaked in blood. She's frantic, screaming for help. In her car are her three children, Christy, Cheryl, and Danny. They've all been shot at close range. Diane tells the police a chilling story. They were victims of a carjacking gone horribly wrong. But as investigators begin to peel back the layers, Diane's story starts to unravel. The first red flag: Diane's calm demeanor. Despite the traumatic event she describes, she appears oddly detached, almost rehearsed. Let's dive deeper into the timeline of events and the twisted mind behind this crime. According to Diane, she was driving on a rural road when a bushy-haired stranger flagged her down. When she stopped, the man demanded her car keys. When she refused, he shot her children in cold blood and then shot her in the arm before fleeing. Diane then drove at a leisurely pace to the hospital, a detail that baffled investigators. Why didn't she speed to get her critically injured children medical help as quickly as possible? Forensics told a different story. The blood spatter and gunpowder residue didn't match Diane's account. The children's wounds indicated they had been shot at close range inside the car, not from an outside assailant. And then there was the gunshot wound on Diane herself, a superficial injury to her arm, almost as if it had been self-inflicted. Detectives dug into Diane's past and discovered a woman obsessed with a man named Robert Knickerbocker, a former lover who did not want children. She wrote letters to him, expressing her desperation to be with him. It became clear that Diane saw her children as obstacles to her happiness. This was no random act of violence, it was a calculated plan to eliminate those she believed were standing in her way. The investigation took a turn when Christy, the eldest daughter, began to recover. Despite her severe injuries and the trauma she endured, Christy found the courage to speak out. Through tears and pain, she recounted the horrifying truth. Her mother had pulled the trigger. Diane had shot her own children and then herself in a twisted attempt to create a believable story. The trial of Diane Downs was a media sensation. She was portrayed as a cold, calculating woman who showed no remorse for her actions. The prosecution presented damning evidence: the letters to Robert, the inconsistencies in her story, and most heart-wrenching of all, Christie's testimony. Christie bravely took the stand, her voice barely a whisper as she recounted the night of the shooting. The courtroom was silent, the air thick with tension as she pointed to her mother and said, "My mom shot me." It was a pivotal moment that sealed Diane's fate. Diane's defense was equally sensational. She claimed a conspiracy, suggesting that police had planted evidence and coerced Christie into testifying against her. But the jury saw through her manipulative tactics. On June 17th, 1984, Diane Downs was found guilty on all charges: one count of murder and two counts of attempted murder. She was sentenced to life in prison plus 50 years. The aftermath of the Diane Downs case left deep scars. Christy and Danny survived, but were forever changed by their mother's betrayal. They were adopted by the lead prosecutor, Fred Hughey, and his wife. They rebuilt their lives, but the trauma of that night lingers. Diane Downs remains in prison, continuing to profess her innocence. She has been denied parole multiple times, with the board citing her lack of remorse and failure to take responsibility for her actions. Her story is a chilling reminder of the depths of human depravity and the devastating impact of a mother's betrayal. What drives a mother to commit such an atrocity? Experts have analyzed Diane's behavior and found signs of narcissistic and histrionic personality disorders. Her need for attention, her manipulation of those around her, and her lack of empathy fit these profiles. Diane's obsession with Robert Knickerbocker and her willingness to sacrifice her children for her desires paint a picture of a deeply disturbed individual. The case of Diane Downs is more than just a true crime story. It's a stark example of the darkest aspects of human nature. It's a story of betrayal, manipulation, and the devastating consequences of a mother's selfishness. As we reflect on this case, let's remember the victims Christy, Cheryl, and Danny and the resilience they've shown in the face of unimaginable trauma. Hey everyone, welcome back to our channel. Today, we're diving into one of the most harrowing and tragic cases in recent history. This is the story of Andrea Yates, a mother who, driven by a severe mental illness, did the unthinkable. We're going to delve into the psychological aspects and unravel how a once loving mother could commit such a horrific act. Get ready because this is going to be a deep and disturbing dive. It's a warm summer morning in Houston, Texas on June 20th, 2001. Andrea Yates, a 37-year-old mother of five, dials 911 with a chilling calmness. When officers arrive, they find a scene straight out of a nightmare. All five of Andrea's children are dead, drowned in the family's bathtub. The question on everyone's mind, how could this happen? To understand, we need to go back in time. Andrea Yates was a high achieving student, valedictorian of her high school, and a caring nurse. She married Rusty Yates in 1993 and they quickly started a family. By all accounts, Andrea was a dedicated and loving mother. But beneath the surface, Andrea was battling severe mental health issues. The Andrea Yates case, a descent into madness. Andrea's mental health struggles began after the birth of her first child, Noah, in 1994. She experienced postpartum depression but managed to cope with it. However, with each subsequent pregnancy, her condition worsened. By the time she had her fourth child, Luke, in February 1999, she was struggling with severe depression and anxiety. After the birth of her fourth child, Andrea's condition took a drastic turn for the worse. She became catatonic and was admitted to a psychiatric hospital. She was diagnosed with major depressive disorder and postpartum psychosis, a rare but severe mental illness characterized by hallucinations and delusions. Despite this, Rusty and Andrea decided to have a fifth child, believing that her condition would improve with medication. On that fateful morning of June 20th, 2001, Andrea systematically drowned her children one by one. She started with the youngest, Mary, and moved her way up to the oldest, Noah. She held each child under the water until they stopped struggling, then laid their bodies on a bed, covering them with a sheet. When she got to Noah, he tried to run, but she caught him and drowned him as well. The methodical nature of the crime shocked everyone who knew her. The investigation revealed a tragic history of mental illness. Andrea had been diagnosed with postpartum depression and psychosis after the birth of her fourth child. She had been hospitalized multiple times and was prescribed antipsychotic medication. Despite the clear warnings from doctors, her husband, Rusty, believed that medication alone would be sufficient and continued to encourage Andrea to have more children against medical advice. In the months leading up to the crime, Andrea's condition deteriorated. She began experiencing delusions and believed that she was possessed by Satan. She thought that by killing her children, she could save their souls from eternal damnation. This was not a cold-blooded killer. This was a woman in the grips of severe mental illness. Andrea Yates' trial was a media circus. The prosecution painted her as a cold and calculating murderer, while the defense argued that she was a victim of her mental illness. The trial brought to light the failures of the mental health system and the stigma surrounding postpartum mental health issues. The jury found Andrea guilty of capital murder, but in a surprising turn of events, they rejected the death penalty, sentencing her to life in prison. However, in 2006, after years of appeals, a Texas Court of Appeals overturned her conviction, citing false testimony from an expert witness. Andrea was retried and found not guilty by reason of insanity. She was committed to a high security mental health facility where she remains to this day. The aftermath of the Andrea Yates case had a profound impact on public awareness of postpartum mental illness. It highlighted the critical need for better mental health support for mothers and sparked a nationwide conversation about the importance of recognizing and treating postpartum depression and psychosis. Rusty Yates, who stood by Andrea during her trials, eventually divorced her and remarried. He has since become an advocate for mental health awareness, speaking openly about the tragedy and his efforts to prevent similar cases. The psychological aspects of this case are as complex as they are tragic. Andrea Yates suffered from severe postpartum psychosis, a rare but serious mental illness that can lead to hallucinations, delusions, and impaired judgment. Her case underscores the importance of early detection and comprehensive treatment of postpartum mental health disorders. Andrea Pia Kennedy was born on July 2nd, 1964, in Hallsville, Texas. She was the youngest of five children in a deeply religious family. From an early age, Andrea excelled in school and later went on to become a registered nurse. She met Rusty Yates in 1989 and they married on April 17th, 1993. Rusty and Andrea shared a fundamentalist Christian faith and believed in having a large family. After the birth of their first child, Noah, Andrea began to show signs of postpartum depression. Rusty's demanding job and frequent relocations added stress to her already fragile mental state. Despite the warning signs, Andrea and Rusty continued to have more children. After the birth of their fourth child, Luke, in February 1999, Andrea's mental health took a severe downturn. She was admitted to a psychiatric hospital and diagnosed with major depressive disorder. Her doctors prescribed antipsychotic medication, but Andrea's condition continued to deteriorate. By the time Andrea became pregnant with their fifth child, Mary, her mental state was in a rapid decline. She began experiencing severe psychotic episodes and delusions. Andrea believed that Satan was speaking to her and that she was destined for eternal damnation. She became convinced that her children were doomed to the same fate unless she took drastic action. Andrea's mental illness was compounded by the isolation and lack of support she experienced. Rusty, despite being aware of her condition, continued to pressure her to have more children. Andrea's doctors had warned Rusty against having more children, but he dismissed their concerns, believing that medication would manage her condition. On the morning of June 20th, 2001, Rusty left for work, leaving Andrea alone with the children. It was during this time that Andrea decided to act on her delusions. She filled the bathtub with water and began her horrific plan. Andrea started with the youngest, Mary, who was just 6 months old. She held her under the water until she stopped moving, then laid her body on the bed. She then brought in John, Paul, and Luke one by one, drowning each of them in the same manner. Finally, she brought in Noah, who was 7 years old. Realizing what was happening, Noah tried to escape, but Andrea caught him and drowned him as well. After killing her children, Andrea calmly called 911 and told the operator that she needed a police officer. She then called Rusty at work and told him to come home immediately. The case of Andrea Yates sparked a national debate about mental health, motherhood, and the criminal justice system. Many questioned how a loving mother could commit such a heinous act, while others pointed to the failures of the mental health system and the lack of support for women suffering from postpartum mental illness. In the years following the murders, Andrea has expressed deep remorse for her actions. She has undergone extensive psychiatric treatment and has become a symbol of the need for better mental health care and support for mothers. Rusty Yates has also been outspoken about the need for mental health awareness. He has worked to raise awareness about postpartum depression and psychosis and has called for reforms in the mental health system. The story of Andrea Yates is a heartbreaking reminder of the devastating effects of untreated mental illness. It's a call to action for better mental health care, support for mothers, and a deeper understanding of the complexities of the human mind. The Susan Smith Case, a tale of deception and tragedy. Hey everyone, welcome back to our channel. Today, we're going to delve into one of the most notorious and heartbreaking cases in true crime history. This is the story of Susan Smith, a mother whose actions shocked the world. We're not just going to recount the well known facts, we're going to dig deep into the psychological underpinnings and the tragic events that led to this crime. Buckle up, because this is going to be a long, intense, and detailed journey into the dark side of human nature. It's a cold night on October 25th, 1994, in Union, South Carolina. Susan Smith, a 23-year-old mother, is seen frantically running to a neighbor's house, screaming that her car has been hijacked with her two young sons, Michael, aged 3, and Alex, aged 14 months, still inside. She claims that a black man carjacked her vehicle at a red light and drove off with her children. The community and law enforcement immediately spring into action. The nation is gripped by the story of a desperate mother searching for her missing children. However, as the investigation unfolds, Susan's story begins to unravel, revealing a dark and tragic truth. To understand the depths of Susan's actions, we need to look back at her troubled upbringing. Susan Lee Vaughn was born on September 26, 1971, in Union, South Carolina. Her parents divorced when she was just 7 years old, and her father committed suicide shortly afterward. This traumatic event had a profound impact on young Susan. Susan's mother remarried a man named Beverly Russell, a prominent local businessman. However, this seemingly stable environment hid dark secrets. Susan later revealed that she had been sexually abused by her stepfather, which added to her emotional turmoil. Despite these challenges, Susan was a bright student and was well liked in her community. She married David Smith in 1991 and they had two sons together. However, the marriage was fraught with difficulties, including infidelity and financial stress. The couple separated multiple times, and Susan's mental health continued to deteriorate. On the night of October 25th, Susan's story was that she had stopped at a red light when an unknown black man approached her car, forced her out, and drove away with her children. The police immediately launched a massive search, with volunteers scouring the area and media broadcasting the children's photos nationwide. For 9 days, Susan appeared on television, tearfully pleading for the return of her boys. Her emotional appeals garnered widespread sympathy, but behind the scenes, investigators were growing suspicious. Her story had inconsistencies, and her demeanor raised red flags. Finally, on November 3rd, 1994, Susan confessed to the crime. In a chilling revelation, she admitted that there was no carjacker. She had driven her car to John D. Long Lake, strapped her sons into their car seats, and let the car roll into the water, watching as it sank with her children inside. The investigation revealed Susan's motive. She was involved in a relationship with a wealthy local man, Tom Findlay, who did not want children. Susan saw her children as obstacles to a new life with him. In her mind, eliminating them was the only way to achieve her desires. The public was outraged. The community that had rallied around Susan now turned against her, and the nation watched in horror as the details of the case emerged. Susan's actions were incomprehensible, and the psychological aspects of her crime became a focal point of discussion. Susan Smith's trial was a media sensation. The prosecution painted her as a cold, calculating murderer driven by selfish desires. They emphasized the premeditated nature of her crime, highlighting her methodical actions leading up to the murders. The defense, however, argued that Susan was a deeply troubled woman suffering from severe depression and emotional instability. They presented evidence of her traumatic past, including the sexual abuse by her stepfather and the emotional turmoil in her marriage. They claimed that Susan's mental state impaired her judgment and led her to commit the unthinkable act. Despite the defense's arguments, the jury was not swayed. On July 22, 1995, Susan Smith was found guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder. She was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 30 years. The aftermath of the Susan Smith case left a lasting impact on the nation. It sparked debates about mental health, the effects of childhood trauma, and the failures of the social support system. Susan's actions were seen as a tragic result of a lifetime of emotional pain and instability. In prison, Susan has had a troubled time. She has faced multiple disciplinary issues, including sexual misconduct with prison guards. Her parole eligibility date is in 2024, but given the nature of her crime and her behavior in prison, it's unlikely she will be released. The community of Union, South Carolina, was deeply scarred by the events. The town that once rallied around a mother in need was left grappling with the betrayal and the tragic loss of 2 innocent lives. The psychological analysis of Susan Smith's case is complex and multifaceted. Experts have pointed to her history of trauma, including her father's suicide and the sexual abuse by her stepfather, as significant factors in her mental health struggles. Her unstable marriage and the pressures of single motherhood further exacerbated her emotional instability. Susan's actions can be seen as a desperate and misguided attempt to escape her circumstances. Her desire for a new life with Tom Findlay, coupled with her deep-seated emotional pain, led her to make a tragic and irreversible decision. Her case underscores the importance of mental health support and the need for early intervention in cases of severe emotional distress. The story of Susan Smith is a tragic and heartbreaking reminder of the devastating effects of untreated mental illness and emotional trauma. It's a story that continues to haunt those who remember the case and serves as a stark warning of the need for better mental health care and support systems. Thanks for tuning in. If you found this story as compelling and haunting as we did, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more in-depth true crime stories. Until next time, stay safe and take care of each other.